It's wonderful to be back together. I know we had to take a break when we were scheduled to be in Lake County, and we regret that, but very happy to be here in Ukiah. And I'm going to introduce our clerk, Brooke Eberhardt, here from Humboldt County to help us. And she's going to go ahead now with the roll call.
Supervisor Crandall,
Here.
Supervisor Gore,
Here.
or I mean Commissioner Gore,
Woo!
Commissioner Fennell,
Here.
Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Thank you. Full house. Wonderful.
I'm going to take this, see what I can do with it in Sonoma County.
Evacuated.
You're welcome to it. I've got some more if you want some.
That's your guys's. When you
That's
that was your
scary
thing
stuff.
about when people are evacuated, so that you don't
Long
have to check the
driveway.
houses. That's good.
That's great. Okay, so we have, I think, a very nice program here today with a lot of information to share. But let's start off with the meeting minutes for the March 29th meeting. And I hope everybody's read them, and if I will entertain a motion.
I will motion to approve the minutes for March 29th, 2019.
Second.
Any discussion further? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll go next to the proposed budget for the 2019-2020 fiscal year of the Russian River Commission. This is just kind of basically housekeeping. We do have that budget included in your packet, and a little blurb about what it does. I would like to ask the treasurer if she would like to make any statement about it. Or...
No? I'm the treasurer.
Yeah.
Yep, I guess I should be since books are kept here. But anyway, no.
That's awesome.
It is what it is.
Treasurer.
Yeah. So basically, the shorthand here is the new budget proves a total of $6,050. We've all committed to putting in $3,000 per member. Don't know if those invoices went out, but basically, I'd entertain a motion to pass that budget.
So move.
Second.
Any discussion from the public on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passed unanimously.
I just have one point. I'll go check with the auditor to see about the invoices and
Okay.
see who's paid, and we'll let everybody know.
Great.
Because
Thank
we
you.
just started, we're 2 months into our new year.
Yeah.
And I know ours weren't available, any funding from Mendocino until that occurred.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. So now we'll start off with some presentations. The first one comes to us from Hank Seaman. He's the Deputy Director of Humboldt County Public Works. He's been working with Craig Tucker, who is our water resources consultant, and he'll be giving us an update on efforts towards relicensing the Potter Valley project. Welcome, Hank.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Can everybody hear Hank?
Yeah. Yes.
Is the microphone working?
Doesn't
Yes.
seem that way.
Well, Kurt, can you hear him?
Okay.
Okay, I didn't know if that was set up or not.
Testing? Is that better?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Hank Seaman, Deputy Director, Humboldt County Public Works. And when this agenda was developed several weeks ago, my colleague Craig Tucker and I were scheduled to come and provide an update. We've modified that, and I'd like to invite Janet Pauley with Mendocino Inland Water and Power Commission. Janet and I will provide an update on the work of the planning agreement parties for the Potter Valley project. So I'd like to ask Janet to give a broad overview, and then I can fill in with some additional details.
Is this one
Thank you,
on?
Hank. Okay, thank you very much, Janet.
Great, thank you. Janet Pauley, Chair, Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission. Hank and I represent two of the partners, the NOI partners, currently working on the license for the Potter Valley project. I'm going to give just a brief update of what's happened since the last Eel Russian River Commission meeting. It's really kind of hard to believe what we've accomplished since the end of March, when we had our last meeting in Eureka. If you remember, FERC had just given us until July 1st to prepare a notice of intent to license the project. We began to form a coalition between CalTrout, Inland Water and Power, and Sonoma Water. On April 30th, we signed, well, first let me start before that. On April 30th, the representatives from those three entities went to Washington, D.C. to meet with FERC to have a discussion about what we were proposing to do as a regional entity. We described to them how we were going to move forward with preparation of the NOI, and after that, a feasibility study to describe what the plan was going to look like in our minds moving forward. By the end of that meeting, I believe FERC was quite impressed with our plan, calling it very positive and unique, which it is. And on that day, we also met with Congressman Huffman to explain our joint plan to him as well. And I think he was extremely pleased. By mid-May, then, the three initial partners had prepared and signed the planning agreement, which outlines our shared objectives and the process that we were undertaking to meet this July 1st deadline. And not long after that, Humboldt County joined our partnership, signed the planning agreement, and also committed funding as the others had already done. On the 28th of July, we filed a notice of intent with FERC to license the project. And it sounds simple, but there was a tremendous effort that went into getting this accomplished by many people. And I would like to praise the fact that collectively we have an amazing team of legal and technical experts that are helping the organization's principals and are continuing to do so. After filing the NOI, we were kind of going to, quote unquote, wait for FERC to approve, but actually we didn't wait at all. We began work immediately on an outline of how we would move forward into towards the next anticipated deadline for the feasibility study. On August 1st, which is probably a record of some kind, we received acceptance from FERC of our plan and our schedule. Our feasibility study is to be completed by April of 2020. We had asked FERC to give us until April 2022 to file the final license application. At first, in their first letter, they agreed, but since then they have decided that they would like to see that final license application by November 15th, 2021. So we have our work cut out for us, just getting to the feasibility study by April next year. We have all hands on deck, and a tremendous amount of effort is going on a daily basis right now. And I'm going to let Hank talk about where we are in that process right now, and then I think we might spend a little bit of time talking about potential new partners.
Thank you, Janet. Maybe a few quick points. One is we have a planning agreement that defines 8 shared objectives, and the planning agreement also references the goals and principles of Congressman Huffman's ad hoc committee. And so those are really the foundational documents for this initiative. And the notice of intent that was submitted on June 28th was submitted as proxies for a potential future regional entity that would step into the shoes of PG&E and be the licensee applicant. So we were proxies for a proposed regional entity. And The planning agreement identifies the need for a feasibility study, and the feasibility study will inform the parties on two key points. One point is whether to join a proposed regional entity that would take on ownership and management of the project, and then whether that regional entity would submit a license application. And it is true that PG&E's existing license terminates in April of 2022. So the planning agreement parties met in July, and it was a very just productive meeting, and we quickly formed a total of 5 work groups. So there's a work group focused on the project plan and fisheries restoration. So that's been consolidated to one work group. There's a work group on communications and public outreach. There's a work group focused on the formation of the regional entity. There's a work group looking at a financial plan. And then there's a work group that is focused on the contract management for the feasibility study. And Sonoma Water has taken the lead on, they've issued the request for qualifications for a consultant to perform the feasibility study, and they will be carrying that contract. And that RFQ is issued, and submittals are due September 3rd. And then there'll be a screening and selection process, and the goal is to have the contract executed by the end of September. And as Jana mentioned, things are moving really fast, but in a very phased and logical manner. And so the goal is for a draft feasibility study to be developed. These are kind of target goals, I think, and there'll be some adjustments, but the target goal is to have a draft feasibility study in January of 2020. And then that would allow the parties to consult with our elected officials. And then the goal is to have a final feasibility study probably in March or early April. And then the goal is to have the decision-making bodies make their decision about joining the regional entity in April of 2020. So that's a broad outline. So if this goes forward, if there's agreement to form a regional entity and work towards a license application, the second half of 2020 would be some back and forth with FERC on the study plan. That there's a tremendous amount of effort that's needed to do studies, to develop a license application. And then the goal would be through the course of 2021 to perform those studies. And then FERC has indicated that they would like to see a preliminary license application in advance of submitting a final license application in April of 2022. So that's the broad outline. So the steering committee for the planning partners have had, have been conversing 2 or 3 times a week for the last several weeks, which has been really challenging with the summer schedules. And there have been discussions about kind of structure for involving stakeholders and also for communications. And so that's very fluid. So the steering committee has identified that there's an interest in conversing with Lake County and the Ukiah tribe in terms of discussions about becoming a planning partner as a signatory to the planning agreement. I should also say that Round Valley Indian Tribe was identified in the planning agreement as kind of pre-approved to be a partner. And so those discussions are ongoing. And then there's also discussions about forming a second group of stakeholders that would be invited to sign what's called our common interest agreement. And so the parties to the plan agreement have signed this common interest agreement, and it identifies that, we're having these discussions on a major initiative. It's highly regulated through FERC. There could be some judicial review towards the end, and, there's a need for having discrete conversations. And so the common interest agreement lays out some terms for those discussions. And so the steering committee has had discussions about inviting other stakeholders to sign that common interest agreement and then be highly engaged and highly informed on kind of the week-to-week developments. The communications work group has also been discussing the need for a really multifaceted public engagement process. And we want to have multiple venues for the public to understand what's happening and have opportunities for input. And so I think today is a good opportunity to continue those discussions. Certainly the Eel Russian River Commission is a really important venue for those discussions. And then there's another item on your agenda to hear from Congressman Huffman's office. And he convened an ad hoc committee in 2017 with stakeholders, and that process is evolving as well. And so I think we're really open for ideas and suggestions on how to have a robust public engagement process. So I think I'll end there and see if there's questions or discussion.
Thank you, Hank. Did you say you wanted to add something in there, Janet?
No, I think Hank introduced the concept of having new partners come to the table. We currently will have Round Valley Tribe. Lake County has indicated that they're of their interest to come to the table. I don't know if Supervisor Crandall wants to,
You can elaborate
on that a little bit, and where you are in that process.
Mr. Crandall?
Yes. So last week, we met initially right around the date of July 1st, last week of June, to discuss coming to the table for the NOI. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get there by the deadline, so we're trying to come into this for the planning agreement portion of it. And we've taken some trips out to Lake Pillsbury, and then decided that we wanted to be part of this co-equal coalition. And so we have a resolution that we had fixed it because it initially stated some other verbiage, and so we have it adjusted, and it should be reconfirmed this next week. And then we're gonna work on getting the budget readjusted on the 10th to come to the table and be part of that planning agreement process. And our goals are to come to the table so that we have a synergistic approach, so that everybody has their concerns met, and there's no position necessarily that we're essentially taken, but we just allowed a group to come and speak with us about their concerns because they're not commonly heard. And so that's really all. If there was anything stated in those meetings that we had on that item of the agenda, was really all that was. But as a county, we know that we want to come together, with an open mind and do what we can to make sure everybody's needs are met.
I would like to just make one quick comment there. All of our entities, all of the NOI partners have met separately with Round Valley Tribes in the past months, and we're looking forward to doing that with Lake County as well. And then after that point, the approval for Lake County to come in, I anticipate will be accomplished. I also would like to thank Hank really quickly because he corrected my plan. The FERC plan, actually, November 2021 is a preliminary license application is required, and then they have given us until 2022 for the final license application, which is very helpful. So thank you, Hank.
Yeah. And so basically at this point, Lake is willing to kind of take that more open approach.
Yes.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Thank you, Eddie.
Welcome.
Anybody else have any questions for Hank and Janet, or any comments?
I'd like to add something. I mean, I just want to say thank you. This has been a lot of work. Janet mentioned some of the meetings, even us going out to DC and sitting with FERC, and FERC, had quite an interesting response to us at first. It was probably one of the most difficult meetings I've been in for the first part of it, about the first hour. And then it broke through, and they're not used to different situations, different scenarios. Hey, since we don't have a regional entity already currently formed, since we don't have a utility accompanying us to the table, we're going to be here doing this. And then the ultimate thing is I want everybody to know that one of the reasons that a lot of people were a little irked that they weren't a part of those conversations. The difficult part of it is the way we function with this entity being a Brown Act committee also, and we know that. So it's like there was. People can assume what they will, but we'd also had accusations come about illegal Brown Act discussions, which put us on alert that we needed to be very careful, and that's the right kind of accountability. I'm not saying that was the wrong kind of approach, but it necessitated a group of us getting together to try and forward that. And I had a conversation with you at a certain time that was like, I'm sorry. There's nothing worse than looking at a colleague and saying I couldn't give you a heads up, right? Because I didn't want to put even progress into a bad place. But then what that necessitated, as we all know, and I think it's important to say this publicly with folks looking in filming, is on the other side, what that necessitated was very quick action to try and show people that you could come to the table and that we could get to this place. And the only way that you can come to this table, and I speak for, I think, myself and some of the other signatory groups, is that when you sign on to that, you have to sign on in good faith to say that we do not know what the answer is. Commissioner Crandall has constituents from Lake Pillsbury who, come hell or high water, pun intended, do not want to lose access to their lake. On the other side, you have constituents who, more than anything in the world, come hell or high water or low water, want that dam to come down. But the only way we were able to come to the place that we are at now and say we're going to do this is by embarking on this feasibility study together, to say we're not going to have any fait accomplis as a part of it. We're not going to have any end game scenarios. Everybody has assumptions out there. There's some people who are saying like, oh yeah, the dam's going to come down because the regulators are going to require it, because there's no way we can get volitional fist passage in this way and that way. And we're going to have to address a lot of those tough questions and understand what the regulatory weight that's going to be brought into it, and what on the other side are the things that we have decision-making authority over. But right now, I appreciate that we have those of us who are public entities at the table. The tribal interest is there. From my part, I've had a lot of interest from the Dry Creek Band of Pomo Indians to participate as well. And so I think they're interested in if Round Valley and if WIOT's involved, is how are they potentially involved. Once again, I think the smart thing for us at this point is to keep taking action, but not to force ourselves into decisions right off the bat, right? Is because we do have the time to make sure that whether it's you sign on to the planning agreement, whether that's the right way to do it. The second thing is that if it's not the planning agreement, what is the ultimate table going to look like? What kind of regional agency or organization are we going to have? Do we have to create something under state law? Right? Do we utilize this JPA? Does that usurp the authority of this one? And I'm bringing this up because we don't, once again, have the answers to this. And we don't really have the forums to go after it. So I just, that's kind of all cards on the table, just like when we sit down in the negotiations going forward, everything on the table. So I appreciate and look forward to going in good faith with you guys. I mean, we all probably have desires going into it, but it's go time.
Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, please.
I just want, for the record, I am the alternate to Janet Pauley for Inland Water and Power Commission to the steering committee, and will participate in one of the subgroups that's meeting, and Hank went over those groups. But I think it's important for the public to realize that several of us, at least 3 of us here, I serve with Commissioner Crandall on Area Agency on Aging, and there's other agency-type meetings between Lake and Mendocino. It's the same with Sonoma County Commissioner Gore and I serve on a number of committees, I guess you would say, that has to do with water in the Russian River. And basically, it includes all stakeholders in the upper Russian River. So I need to say that because we do meet on different levels. We will not be discussing any Eel Russian River Commission business, which includes the Potter Valley Project and the signing parties to the agreement. So we are all being extremely careful. So I can't talk to Estelle if she calls, depending what the issue is. And the same with all of you. So regional, dual county meetings. We're doing our business as county supervisors, so I want you all to understand that, and that we will be extremely careful about what business we discuss.
Yeah, and I would just add that, to my mind, this particular body is all about daylighting, is all about sharing that information. By default, you have to have the people involved. And I actually think it's a blessing that so many people have had so much involvement all along. So again, yeah, I'll reiterate, we're very careful about the Brown Act. We make jokes about it when we're at CSAC, et cetera. We can't even have a drink, but that's not true. We do occasionally.
We don't talk about this.
We do
CSAC
occasionally
and
have social
RCRC.
moments. We're breaking bread together right now.
And maybe LAFCO.
And
Cow
LAFCO, everything. So I would like to ask if anybody in the audience, in the public, would like to comment on this item. Welcome.
Good morning, Supervisors and Commissioners. Vivian Hellewell, Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations and the Institute for Fisheries Resources. I want to thank everyone who's been working so hard for a couple of years now to talk about all the issues around Potter Valley and to explore the different needs that different groups have related to that, and especially the groups that are coming together to try to do the license application. I know a lot of very hard work has gone into that. We find that the best way to achieve a long-lasting solution is for everyone's needs to be heard, for everyone to be at the table, and to follow the lead of the late, great Troy Fletcher from the Klamath River. The best way is for each of us to try to solve each other's problems and think about what the other people need in order to get our own needs met as much as possible. And so we're either going to all come together or things will come apart. And our hope is that we will come together and create a lasting solution in the Potter Valley Eel Russian River that could be a model for any big complex disputes for other people who want to solve their problems in these expanding communities. And so as we keep meeting over the years, we learn more about our neighbors who live far away and how their economies and families have come to rely on different parts of these river systems. And so, you know, my own constituents are the commercial fishermen in the ocean. And I also have a question for Supervisor Brown. I noticed when I was reviewing the Lake County Supervisors meeting that you perhaps have some doubts about the studies that were done by the working group expert teams on fish passage and water supply. And those groups have come to their conclusions, but they haven't produced their final reports yet. We're waiting for the final reports. So I was curious to know what those issues are about the studies, and I hope that people who are joining will take a look at those studies on pottervalley.org and come to your own conclusions, be familiar with the work that's been done. there was very high confidence in all the people that I knew of that I'd talked to before in the expertise of these groups that did the studies. And that's basically what I have to say this morning.
Thank you, Vivian.
Thank you.
Just as a note, when it comes to public comment, we don't do back and forth. We'll take it, and then if the commissioners have any comments to afterwards,
Thank
that's
you.
when you would hear from them.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Scott Greason, Conservation Director, Friends of the Eel River. The eel and its fisheries have suffered serious and ongoing harms from the Scott and Cape Horn dams for a century now. As Hank told you, the two-basin solution framework that Representative Huffman has proposed rests on two basic principles. Fish get the passage they need, and Russian River water users get the water they need. For us as Eel River fisheries advocates of the restoration, it's clear that the two-basin framework offers the clearest and most certain path to a solution that restores fish passage to the upper Eel River, which is an absolute precondition for recovery of some of the fish we're concerned about, especially summer steelhead. As I've noted elsewhere, for Friends of the Eel to join this effort meant agreeing to give up our long-held opposition to the interbasin diversion of Eel River water to the Russian River. This is something we firmly oppose in principle, but we have agreed in principle to support a continued diversion if we can secure the volitional passage that Eel River salmon, steelhead, and lamprey need. The science on this matter is now crystal clear. We don't have the final report out, as Vivian indicated, but the experts have assessed the options, and neither fish ladders nor trap and haul come anywhere near close to meeting fisheries needs. Only dam removal does. The only thing that comes close to full dam removal is partial dam removal. That's just the facts. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that our good faith in this effort is being reciprocated. I think we need to be candid about the challenge this presents to the two-basin solution and to the overall notice of intent effort. Mendocino County Inland Water and Power has insisted that Lake County be joined to the planning agreement as a voting member. Now, David Keller, my colleague, and I have attended the last two meetings of the Lake County Board of Supervisors. It has been very clear in those discussions that the board firmly opposes Scott Dam removal. Under these circumstances, Lake County's professed adherence to the two-basin principles can only be understood as a charade. Mendocino County Inland Water and Power's insistence that Lake County come in appears to be an effort to frustrate the two-basin solution. Absent an unequivocal commitment by Lake County to support dam removal, as we have committed to support continued diversion, we will oppose Lake County's entry into the planning agreement, and we are very concerned by this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Fettle, Commissioner Brown, Commissioners. Thank you. I'm Kyle Knopp. I'm the City Manager for the City of Rio Dell up in Humboldt County. I want to just say that we've been watching the work of the Eel Russian River Commission. I want to thank the commissioners for your work on this. We know it's important work, and we're willing to participate in the future with any work that needs to be done in the future. We do have a high degree of confidence in Hank here and the fact-based approach. So we want to just lend that support. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Carl.
Devin Jones, Mendocino County Farm Bureau. I apologize for my froggy voice. I got a lovely head cold. Just maybe a point of clarification. I had a number of members contact me in the last couple of days, fairly upset about some local recent publications that were put out in terms of the messaging that was implied through one of the existing NOI partners. And so I would like some maybe clarification on the subgroup regarding, the messaging, public relations. Where is that going to go? I mean, I think there's going to have to be some trust on both sides here. We've heard some concerns this morning expressed, and I'm bringing forward another. So, in terms of, the four entities for sure that are engaged, plus the additional entities that are being considered, which we support the consideration of bringing on additional partners into this process, including Lake County. and Round Valley Indian Tribe. I think if we're really going to get to a different point in this process than we've been in the past, we're going to have to set aside some preconceived notions of where we've been. So just maybe a little bit point of clarification on how the group is going to work together to kind of come up with consistent messaging and a public relations process. Thank you.
You, Devin? Anybody else with any comments?
As commissioners, my name is George Shinquini, and I am part of the Pillsbury Alliance, as well as I'm a president for Russian River Sportsman's Club, but I'm here speaking on my own behalf. The thing about I totally disagree with some of our previous speakers about we can't get volitional fish passage at Lake Pillsbury without total removal of the dam. There's a number of things. This is developing right as we speak. There's a company that's developed this fish passage. It's called Whoosh, and you can go online and check out their videos on that. They've been testing it, and it's been very successful. It actually monitors the species of the fish, has the capability of separating it, can lift the fish several hundred feet without injury to the fish. They're working with NOAA and all the fish and wildlife people in Washington State and Canada and Oregon, and I think it's something we need to look at. Yesterday I returned from the Rogue River fishing salmon. They're having a terrible return on the northern rivers. It's really good here. We saw the article in the paper this morning about how the fish, salmon are doing really well here in the Bay Area. Well, that's because of the fishermen's associations hatching fish and actually trap and hauling them and help them get back to the ocean. And now we're starting to see that success. I'm advocating that we immediately start a hatch box program on the eel, which has worked on the Mattole River, which is one of our last meetings in Eureka, was mentioned about the success of the hatch box program for king salmon. There's no reason why we shouldn't be doing this now while we're trying to argue about whether dam removal and get the population up. I totally agree with the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations that we need fish. And there's no reason why we can't have volitional fish passage and the water. So we just need to work together and be open-minded on solution. And I plan to dedicate the rest of my life as far as volitional fish passage on Lake Pillsbury, as well as stream restoration and this hatch box program. So I think we need to look at alternatives to get the fish population up on the eel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Like I said,
Well, good morning, and thank you for welcoming me here. I'm Melanie Bagby. I'm the mayor of Cloverdale, and I'm also the chair of the Russian River Watershed Association. I'm with my vice chair, Mayor Mo Mulhern from City of Ukiah. So thank you so much for coming down our way and having this hearing. I'm sorry I won't be contributing a lot to the discussion today, but I just wanted to let you know that we are here and we're going to try to participate and observe a little bit more strongly from the Russian River Watershed Association. Obviously, it goes without saying that as mayors of towns along the Russian River and representing the watershed, we have a vested interest in well, actually, the availability of the water is it's our survival. It's the survival of our community, and I believe that this board really understands that. And it coupled with that is also the protection of our environment and making sure that both our environment is protected and also the industries that are dependent on that, because we're all dependent on each other. I don't look at serving on the Russian River Watershed Association as an obligation for, I'm representing my city. We're representing a region, and it's the health and well-being of the region going forward that I think we're all here to protect. So I just want to thank you for your hard work and for coming down to Ukiah and having a meeting here. And the Watershed Association and the City of Cloverdale will obviously be watching this issue very closely as it goes on. So thank you so much for your service. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Okay, seeing none, I will bring it back to the commission. There are a couple of things I just wanted to go back to so that we don't forget to deal with them. There was a question about the plans for communication. I'd like to hear a little bit more of a discussion of that. Also, the studies that were done. And I would just like to throw in there very quickly thought that occurred to me. Again, as I said, this has been for years a really good venue for sharing information about the Potter Valley Project. And now we're at this huge moment of change and a huge responsibility coming on top of us here. I think the feasibility study process will be in part a very technical approach, but there will also be room for public input during that process before we come up with the final of that. And I would really welcome everybody who has spoken here today and many others to stay informed about that and to attend any workshops that are put together. And I'd like to ask Janet and Hank to give us an idea of how that process went. First of all, the communication, and second of all, the timeline of the feasibility study.
The communications, we have a separate working group that's involved, and they are currently preparing comments with regard to things like if we, so we have a message, as Ms. Jones mentioned. Are we going to have a consistent message? We have to have a consistent message moving forward at this point in time. Will the message change? Probably it will as we get down the road further. I think there are a lot of things that even we are not clear about yet, and that will come to us. Again, the group of people that we have working in these groups are remarkable. We have a tremendous amount of talent, both legal and technical expertise on all of these subgroups. And again, we are going to be looking for information and comments from other entities as we move forward. This public forum and then the Congressman's ad hoc as well. There will be another opportunity that's going to open up for everyone as we move forward in the FERC process. And there are others here that I'm sure can shed light on that better than I can. But in the past, in every FERC process, there are opportunities, many opportunities for public comment as the process moves along. And I fully expect that there will be an invitation to intervene in this FERC process at some point as well. And everybody will need to take advantage of that opportunity and make sure that they're at the table in that way. But again, back to communication. I'm hoping that we will have a very clear message moving forward. There are some questions that were raised today that beg answers, and we will be able to provide those as we move ahead.
And I'll just supplement Jan's remarks to say that we'll definitely take the feedback today back to the communications work group. And from the very first steering committee meeting, we identified the need for proactive communication, and they've been working on that. And I would be hopeful within the next few weeks that a shared statement of where things are at and what's the immediate future can be issued. So I'll take that back personally and just express that goal. And I would also just encourage people to review the Congressman Huffman two-basin solution principles and the shared objectives in the planning agreement. All the parties of this planning agreement have committed to those principles and objectives. And so that's really our foundation. And then the request for qualifications that's been issued to perform the feasibility study defines the work elements for the feasibility study, and that's all been approved by the plan agreement parties. So that's today, that those statements and articulations represent the current message from the planning group. And so that can be reviewed today, and then hopefully within the next few weeks, we'll have more specific communications from the communication work group.
Great, thank you. I, just as a note, everybody voiced their role in this, and just as you, I would like you to know that I'm Humboldt County's representative on the PAP, as we call it right now. Any thoughts from my colleagues? Because I have some more to add, but I'd like to Carrie, please.
I feel we have a number of individuals here today that might not understand the FERC intervener process. Can you just basically go over it in a nutshell?
Well, in past FERC processes and over the years, there will come a time during the process where FERC will actually ask for comments and intervention. And at that point in time, anyone, even an individual or any entity, can formally intervene in the process. There's a way to do that. You will see FERC will outline it in this case, in this effort, and you formally file with FERC. Once you do that, you are getting all of the communications with regards to the Potter Valley project licensing moving forward. And that will continue until this process ends, whenever this process ends. And so I anticipate that happening. I don't know if anyone here understands if that will happen after April 2020 at this point in time, after our feasibility study is filed, or if there's actually going to be an opportunity prior to then. I'm not aware. I'm not sure if anybody here is aware.
So intervener can be a government entity. It can also be an organization, and it can also be individuals.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So that's anybody else? So I have a few thoughts I want to share with you. Obviously Hank and Craig are doing the lion's share of the work on behalf of Humboldt County, but as I said, I'm a member, and I want to reiterate for you very strongly that my guiding principle in all my work, public and private, is working together is how we get things done. So I really think teamwork is what has to underlie all of this, and that became very clear when Humboldt joined in. We made the position clear that we are open to finding the best solution. The feasibility study will give us some idea of how we can achieve what we want to achieve, what we can and cannot do, whether or not a regional entity will look one way or another, JPA, a district, we don't know. But all of those things will be studied, and then will give us a better idea of how to move forward. I want to reiterate that it's my considered opinion that the people who have been involved in this all along are looking at this as a team. We're just little human beings who've been handed a gigantic issue. We have to find the solution, and I think working together we will. So I want you to be comfortable with that's definitely where we're coming from. And I did have a question with regard to FERC. I'm not up to speed on this. They have told us that they would let us know if there were other applications. Have we heard of any others?
When an entity files something with FERC, it's my understanding it becomes a public document, and we are unaware of any other entity that has filed for the license to prepare the new license for the project.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it looks like we're probably it. So I want to thank you very, very much. I really appreciate all your work. And I know we'll be hearing from Congressman Huffman's representative, John, very shortly. And there'll probably be more thoughts on the ad hoc committee.
Chairwoman Fenwell, I just wanted to comment on one thing that's been brought up during the public comment. And that is about us being like a charade of all of this other things. And I just want to assure that From your perspective, I understand that. I came in very new. There was a previous chair. There was a previous board of supervisors sitting in my seat last year, Jim Steele. I'm positive he took a different approach than the way that I am. One of the things is that I didn't even go to him for consult on this because I didn't want to take his position. I wanted to form my own. And so, unfortunately, on some instances, it may have seemed as if I was taking a stance. All I was doing was getting information from constituents that are in my area. They had said things at meetings. I reiterated to Mr. Greason, even in that meeting, that, I'm just giving them a voice. The bottom line is an objective approach to this. And, it's all okay to be speculative, but at the same time, my goal is really to get, and I was actually glad that he was there to give another perspective, regardless of how it was brought to us, even if it was controversial or even if it was, with some emotion. I still appreciate that. And that's the type of person that I am. And that's why I was elected to what I was able to do in Lake County. And that's the approach that I'm going to take, is an objective approach and welcome everybody's input. So just want to assure everyone that. So.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Crandall. All right, so thank you again, Hank and Janet. Really appreciate your helping us here today. And with this, we'll go to something that we've been hearing a lot of over the years and years, and I'm very glad to see Paul Kubitschek is still here. We'll go to a PG&E's update on the Potter Valley ecological studies that we've got. Paul Kubitschek, who is the Senior Consultant Scientist, Aquatic Biologist, Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Hi, Paul. Great to see you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Estelle. It's great seeing you and the rest of the commissioners. Good morning, commissioners. Pleasure to be here today to provide you with an update on our aquatic biology studies at the Potter Valley Project. This, as you mentioned, this is something that we do on a regular basis. We haven't been here for a while. We missed the last meeting, unfortunately. So today we're going to take the opportunity to sort of give you a whole year's worth of information. And I'll be sharing responsibilities for the presentation today with two of my colleagues, Andrew Anderson on my right and Larry Week on my left.
Nice.
Larry Week. Oh, yeah. Larry Wise. I have to tell you why I said Larry Week. I don't know if any of you know Larry Week, but he's a former California Department of Fish and Wildlife biologist who worked on the Potter Valley Project for many years. And as Larry Weiss and I were driving up here, we got into a conversation about the old days, and I started talking about Larry Week, and so I still have him on my mind. He was a great biologist for the department. You brought him back. Yeah, I brought him back. He'd probably be happy to know that he's here today. So, anyway, as many of you know, I've been looking towards retirement for some time, and I finally have a plan in place to retire late this year. And so over the past couple of years, we've been going through a transition process on responsibilities for the Potter Valley Project. And when it comes to the license compliance side of things, I've been working very closely with Andrew. And Andrew now is taking over the lead on our license compliance activities. And we'll continue to be working on that into the future. And then Larry has been working on the relicensing aspects of the project from the onset when PG&E started the relicensing process in April of 2017. And so he's very familiar with the whole relicensing aspect of this and the studies associated with that. So I'm happy to have these guys here today, and I'm just going to be doing a couple of introductory slides and then handing it over to them. So let's move on. And just by way of orientation, it's always good to see what we're talking about here and where we are. Potter Valley Project and the headwaters of the Eel and Russian River watersheds. We take water out of Lake Pillsbury, which is our storage reservoir formed by Scott Dam. That water comes downstream 12 miles to the diversion point at Van Arsdale Reservoir, which is formed by Cape Horn Dam. And at that point, the water is diverted through the single ridge that separates the upper Eel and Russian River watersheds. It goes down to a powerhouse in Potter Valley, that water being released to the East Branch Russian, and it eventually flows into Lake Mendocino, which is operated by the Army Corps of Engineers and Sonoma County Water Agency. Just a few pictures to help get people back in the right mindset here for the project. We have Lake Pillsbury, formed by Scott Dam and our needle valve release down the Eel River. There is no fish ladder at Scott Dam. It's as far upstream as the salmon, steelhead, and lamprey are able to get. We do have minimum flow release requirements at Scott Dam to protect the downstream resources. About 11 miles downstream, we have Cape Horn Dam, which forms the Van Arsdale Reservoir diversion point. We do have a fish ladder that goes over Cape Horn Dam. And we have the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Van Arsdale Fishery Station, which is a counting station for the adult fish coming upstream. We have Potter Valley Powerhouse. There, an aerial shot, 9.2 megawatt capacity powerhouse. And then we've got a shot of the Eel River about 25 miles downstream from Cape Horn Dam during the summer period. So what we're going to do today is talk about the studies that have been going on over the past year. And, we heard through the previous speakers about the licensing effort going on amongst the NOI partners. While that goes on, PG&E remains the owner, operator, and licensee of the Potter Valley Project. And as such, we continue with our obligations under the FERC license and under the National Marine Fisheries Service's biological opinion and the associated reasonable and prudent alternative. You often hear that referred to as the RPA. And so those are the license compliance studies that we continue doing, and we've been doing those since about 2005, and we'll be continuing doing those as long as, well, at least up through the expiration of the current license, which would be through April of 2022. And then from a relicensing study standpoint, I mentioned earlier we did start the relicensing process for the Potter Valley Project in April 2017. And before making a decision to withdraw our relicensing NOI in January of this year, we had completed 1 year of relicensing studies in 2018. So today we'll be reporting on both the license compliance studies under the current FERC license and RPA, and also the relicensing studies that we completed in 2018. And so at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Andrew, and he'll take us through the license compliance studies over the past year.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Andrew Anderson. I'm an aquatic biologist with PG&E, and I've been working with Paul on the Potter Valley Project for a little over 2 years now. And like he mentioned, mostly just on the license compliance side of things. So today we're going to go over the 2018 license compliance studies, and we've got some information for the 2019 studies that we've conducted thus far this year. And so I'll go ahead and get started. So as Paul mentioned, the license compliance studies are a series of studies required by the FERC license and the National Marine Fisheries Service's biological opinion and reasonable prudent alternative. And the intention of the studies is to evaluate the effectiveness of the license conditions. We've been conducting these studies since 2005, and as Paul said just a minute ago, we will continue conducting those studies at least until the end of the current term of the license in April of 2022. So here's a list of the license compliance studies that we perform out there. We have the annual performance monitoring, the Chinook salmon carcass surveys, summer water temperature monitoring, summer fish rearing monitoring, pike minnow monitoring and suppression, and then we also conduct bald eagle productivity surveys. I'll start off with the annual performance monitoring, which consists of two components, a stream flow or a hydrologic component, which is stream flow records, and a fisheries component, which is the returns of Chinook salmon and steelhead to Van Arsdale Fisheries Station or Cape Horn Dam. We've got a shot there of Scott Dam releasing water from the surface, and you can see the needle valve also functioning there in the photo, and then we have a photo of Scott Harris there at the department's fish station, and Scott Harris is an employee of the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and he's processing an adult Chinook salmon there. So the hydrologic component, as I mentioned, consists of stream flow records. Here's some photographs of the project area, and the intent of these photographs is just to show the dramatic variation in stream flow we have here on the Eel River and in California with the Mediterranean climate. We go from really dry conditions in the summer to some really high flow, high precipitation events in the winter. And so in the upper right there is Cape Horn Dam under some moderate flow conditions. You can see the fish barrier dam here in the lower part of the photo, and then the fish hotel just poking out over that bedrock there. And then this photo here was taken in February of this year at about 30,000 CFS. And it's hard to see in the photo here, but the right flank of the dam is actually right there. And the entire facility or structure has basically just become a giant rapid. All the fish hotel, the dam itself are all underwater. And so we go from, this in the summer, nice low flow, warm, hot conditions out there, to this in the wintertime. So it presents some challenges, obviously, at our facilities. Here's the hydrograph from water year 2018. Which runs from October 2017 through September 2018. You can see this year we started off really slow. We didn't get much rain at all. We had one small storm there in November, and then not much through 2017, and it was looking pretty dry even in early winter 2018, to the point where we had actually reconvened the drought working group in anticipation of not being able to fill our reservoir. We got lucky though, and in March we got a good storm, and that was followed by an even larger storm in April, and we were able to fill the reservoir that year. The storms tailed off after April, and we ended up with only getting just under 30 inches of annual rainfall that year. And you can contrast that with this year. Here's the water year 2019 up until March, which is when we had the annual meeting for the project. So we only have the data plotted up here through mid-March. But you can see, while we did start off with pretty slow here with rainfall, first storm at the end of November again, and then pretty dry December, things really picked up in January, and we ended up getting hit with several big storms there consecutively in January and February. At the time of this graph was prepared, I had already received almost 40 inches of rainfall on the year, and I think at this point of the year, or as of June or July, we received almost 50 inches of rainfall, so it was a good water year this year. This is the hydrograph for 2019, but with a larger y-axis, so you can see the peaks that we hit. We had 3 storms where flows got up to over 10,000 CFS on the Eel River. We had this big one where it's showing at 25,000, but we think it actually got upwards of 30,000 CFS. And while we don't have the data shown on this figure here, we do know that we got some good storms later in the year, and even up until May, we had some really good conditions out there in high flow. So it was a really good water year. So the fisheries data, the component of the annual performance monitoring, like I said, that's the Chinook salmon and steelhead returns to Van Arsdale Fish Station. We got some photos up here. There's Scott Harris again with another adult Chinook salmon. And then we've got the facilities there in the middle. You can see the fish ladder and the fish station, and then there's the diversion pictured in this photo as well. And then an adult steelhead being processed there at the fish station. This figure shows the historical returns of Chinook salmon to the Van Arsdale Fish Station. We've got data going back to the mid-40s. The department wasn't really consistent about collecting data on Chinook salmon early on. They didn't really start being consistent with collecting that data until 1955, and you can see we had really low returns of Chinook salmon to the project area back then. And aside from this little few years here around in the mid 60s, it was really low numbers, and quite frankly, that was probably due to the way the project was operated back then. It had a really low minimum in-stream flow below Cape Horn Dam. I think it was only 2 CFS. So back then, when we would get storms, water would come up, fish would start to move, and then the flows would drop back down. So those fish didn't really have an opportunity to migrate. Starting in 1979 or 80, the project started to mimic the natural hydrograph, and you can see the numbers started to rebound.
nicely when the project began operating like that. And then we had another decline in population in the 90s into the mid 90s, and I believe that was kind of representative of what was happening elsewhere on the North Coast. Anyways, we started to see numbers come back again in the late 90s, and then there's a hatchery component here around 2000, and I think the hatchery program continued until 2004. But basically, we see numbers around 500 or below or above most of the years in recent times, at least, aside from these three kind of outlying years, 2010, 11, and 12, where we had some really big returns to the project. Since then, we've been we had 4 years of drought. Conditions haven't been great. We've seen numbers decrease significantly out there. And this year, or 2018 was a low count, and in 2019, I think we only had 95 Chinook salmon returned to the fish station. So that was a really low year. This year was. Here's the steelhead counts, the historical steelhead counts at Van Arsdale. This is a great data set. It goes back to 1922. The department operated this facility as an egg-taking station for propagating steelhead. So there's really consistent data set of steelhead numbers dating back all the way to 22. And it's different story than what the Chinook salmon have. We had a really nice population of steelhead out there for many years. And then, there's a few years where we had low returns or no data, but it wasn't until the mid-60s where we see numbers start to really decline and stay low. We don't really know exactly why that is, but we do know that there was some land use issues in the watershed at the time. The area was being heavily logged. We had road construction. We also had a really big flood in 64, 65, and there was some widespread erosion and sedimentation. So, anyways, since then, numbers have been pretty low. We see this hatchery component come in the 80s, and over time, the wild steelhead numbers really declined, and we were mostly seeing hatchery steelhead return into the fish station. And that hatchery program also, I believe, ended in 2004, and since then we've just had relatively low numbers of steelhead coming back to the fish station. And in 2019, I think we had 309 adult steelhead migrate up the fish ladder. So now I'll talk a little bit about the Chinook salmon carcass surveys that we do out there. We do these each year. It's weekly surveys in the Eel River. There's one index reach in the Eel River and 5 index reaches in the Tomkai drainage. We start these surveys as soon as the first fish is detected at the fish station. So it's usually after the first good storm we have in November, or sometimes October, sometimes December. It really consists of a team of 2 surveyors hiking these reaches and looking for live fish carcasses or reds, and they're collecting that data and reporting it back to us. For 2018-19, we had the first Chinook salmon arrived at the fish station on November 28th. If you recall back to that hydrograph, we had that first storm at the end of November. It triggered the fish to start moving up. So we were able to conduct 5 surveys in the Eel River indexed reach before, that was between December 5th and January 3rd. And we were limited basically due to high flows in the reach and safety concerns for surveyors and visibility with turbidity. So we only had 5 surveys in that reach. And then fish had access to Tomkai Creek in early December, soon thereafter that first storm. And so we were able to conduct 6 sets of carcass surveys in the Tomkai Creek drainage, December 3rd through January 26th. We were limited on those surveys as well due to high flows and also just really low fish numbers. The crews were not seeing any fish, so we were conducting a subset of the surveys or just not doing them at all because there was no fish. And that last survey on January 26th was really to just go out and confirm an end to the salmon run. And the preliminary population estimate for Chinook salmon in the Tomkai Creek drainage is pretty dire this year. We only had 10 fish observed. Granted, we were limited by visibility and high flows, so it's likely that some fish were missed, but it's a pretty low number for this year. This figure is the historical adult Chinook salmon returns to the upper mainstem eel, Cape Horn Dam, and Tomkai Creek.
got Tom Kite Creek and the hatched bars, and the Cape Horn Dam or Van Arsdale Fish Station and the clear bars. Historically, or dating, back in the 80s, we had pretty good returns to the Tom Kite Creek drainage and decent numbers of fish coming up the Eel River. And then we have that decline in Chinook salmon in the 90s, and it's odd to see, but when the fish returned after that, they kind of switched, or they did switch, where the habitat they were using. We see that the fish are no longer really utilizing the Tom Kite Creek drainage, and most of the Chinook salmon that we see return to the project area are using the main stem Eel River and migrating up through the Cape Horn Dam fish ladder. So, here's our 2018-19. That we had 95 fish come up through Cape Horn Dam, and then that little tiny sliver of fish that came up Tom Kite Creek. Summer water temperature monitoring. This we do each year. We have been doing this since 2005. We have 2018, we had 25 sites in the Eel River from above Lake Pillsbury to below the confluence of the Middle Fork. The thermographs or data loggers go in May, and they're collected in October. Those data loggers are continuously monitoring temperature, and they're collecting data, I think, on 15-minute intervals. We also installed vertical arrays in 2 pools at the confluence of Whitney Creek and Thomas Creek in 2018. You'll see up here 2019, we reduced the number of monitoring sites that we were doing. That was in collaboration with the agencies and Round Valley Indian tribes as part of the study trade-offs. We still have the same coverage. We've got a site above Lake Pillsbury all the way down to the confluence of the Middle Fork Eel, but we do have fewer monitoring sites. In both 2018 and 19, we installed vertical arrays in Lake Pillsbury behind the dam in the deepest part of the reservoir there, and that's to get temperature profiles of the reservoir. So this figure is the main stem water temperature. Water temperatures at selected sites in the main stem Eel River between Bloody Rock, which is about 5 miles upstream of Lake Pillsbury, and down to the Middle Fork Eel. You can see here this thick blue line is the PG&E's gauging station E2, which is just below the base of Scott Dam. And the temperatures trend up as you move from upstream to downstream. This is the daily mean temperatures. You can see we got to temperatures between 25 and 30 degrees at the hottest time of the summer out there. Obviously down here we're talking about the warmer reaches of the river down near Outlet Creek and down towards the Middle Fork. I'll point out here this is the temperature recorder from Eel above Lake Pillsbury. So this is the temperature of the water going into Lake Pillsbury. And you can see here that we kind of maintain the influence of the cold water coming out of the dam all the way down to below Cape Horn Dam, which is this line here. And then after that, we're down to the Tom Kite Creek confluence, and we know we lose the influence of the cold water once we get down that far. This is the daily maximums, the same sites. It's just showing that basically the same thing. We're getting warmer as we move downstream, except we did see some pretty high maximum temperatures above 30 degrees. I think the warmest site was Eel at Ramsing Ranch, which is downstream of Emmendale, but above Outlet Creek, I think. So. Here is one of the vertical arrays that we installed in the pool, Eel River above Whitney Creek pool. The purpose of this graph is to just demonstrate that we do see stratification in the pools during the summer months out there on the Eel River. It's pretty remarkable. The pool is only about 10 feet deep, but we see a pretty good variation in temperature with some cooler temperatures down at the bottom of the pool between 20 and 25 degrees. And then up at the top, we're above 25. So we also did install one other vertical array in 2018 in the pool at Thomas Creek confluence. And it tells a similar story that we see stratification in those pools out there in the summertime. This is our vertical array in Lake Pillsbury. The vertical array is installed using a buoy and an anchor, and we hook thermographs onto that buoy line at 2-meter intervals all the way down to the bottom of the reservoir. And we deployed this array in 2018 at the end of April, and so we started collecting data in the beginning of May, and you can see the lake had already started to stratify at the time we got this in. The temperatures slowly increase as the summer wears on, and then the lake turns over again in late September, October. We also plotted the temperature at E2 on this graph. It just shows what's coming out of the dam right there below. And it's interesting here. You can see this peak or increased temperature here. And this is when we're doing the spring release strategy in coordination with the agencies and around Valley Indian tribes. And it's to encourage the timely downstream migration of salmonids from the project area. And what we're doing is we're mixing surface water or using surface water to increase temperatures and also pulse flows to mimic like a spring storm and get those fish moving. So you can see we started that I think mid to late May, and it continues until the mid-June, and then we drop back down to just needle valve releases and cool water for the summer. So this is the summer fish rearing monitoring that we do each year. Also part of the NIMS biological opinion, RPA. In 2018, we had 5 backpack electrofishing sites and 5 snorkeling sites in the Eel River between Cape Horn Dam and Middle Fork. All those sites are below Cape Horn Dam. We also did 4 backpack electrofishing sites in selected tributaries. 2 of the tributaries were between the dams, Benmore Creek and Soda Creek, and 2 of the tributaries were downstream of Cape Horn Dam. And so we did, in 2019, we've reduced the number of backpack electrofishing sites down to 3 sites. So we didn't do the tributaries, and we cut 2 sites. And this is all part of the study trade-offs that we work with the agencies and tribes on. The photo here is one of our sites out there working. It's a pretty involved effort. We get 3 backpacks going, 2 netters, bucket runners. We've got block nets set up, and we're capturing fish, and people are bucketing them over to the side where we have some data keepers that are processing the fish expeditiously and getting them back into live cars in the river so we can minimize mortality. And then this photo on the right here is our snorkelers doing a snorkel survey of one of the sites, which are typically associated with the backpack e-fishing site. We're backpack electrofishing the Riffle Run habitat, and then we've got a crew snorkeling the pool habitat adjacent to the Riffle Run. So for 2018, we had that really dry water year, and we had hot temperatures, so we saw a really low catch of juvenile steelhead out there that year. And I guess the catch of other species were pretty typical of what we'd expect. But again, that was it was a very dry water year classification, and we had a really hot summer. So it wasn't completely unexpected, but it was really low numbers. So lower than we've had in recent years. 2019 though is a complete opposite. We were out there this year, and we have a wet water year classification with higher flows, and we had a mild summer. And we had one of the, I guess, really good catch of steelhead. And at Emmendale, I think we had one of the highest catches that we've had out there since we've been doing these RPA studies. So we had high flow or high minimum in-stream flow releases below Cape Horn Dam. And then because we had such a favorable spring with natural flows, the agencies were able to preserve their block water that they have allocated to them, and they use the block water to supplement flows over the summer to improve rearing conditions. So we had a high minimum in-stream flow release, and then additional water out there with the agencies using their block water. Photos here, we've got steelhead trout, the Sacramento pike minnow, and then an adult Pacific lamprey on the bottom. This figure shows the estimated historical lineal densities for steelhead, trout, and pike minnow captured at our uppermost site, the eel below Cape Horn Dam. We've got steelhead in blue and pike minnow in red. And as you can see here, this is a really long data set. We've been sampling this site, or PG&E and their contractors, since 1981. There's been years where we didn't collect data, but it's one that we did this year and we will continue to do as part of the summer monitoring. And you can see we've had pretty good success out there capturing steelhead, which is like I said, kind of expected. It's the uppermost survey site. It's still getting that cold water influence from the dams in the summertime. It's got great canopy cover, some complex habitat along the margins of the stream. So each year we expect to see steelhead at this site. In 2018, it was one of the lower years. We didn't have, I think we got maybe 1 or 2 steelhead at that site, which is low. And then we did see quite a few pike minnow. Notice the y-axis on this graph is much greater than the one I'm going to flip to here. Or this one is greater. This is now up to 25,000 individuals. This is the same setup on the graph, but this is our lower site at eel below Emmendale. So we're several miles downstream now. We've lost the influence of the cold water. And at this site, we typically don't see steelhead. As you can see over the years, it's mostly been pike minnow. There are some years where we pick up a handful of steelhead. But again, notice the y-axis here. We're getting a lot more pike minnow at this site. And again, these are all young year pike minnow. Typically, we don't usually encounter adult pike minnow because we're electrofishing in the ripple run habitat, so we're picking up the smaller individuals. The good news is that this year we did get, like I mentioned, one of the highest catches of steelhead at this site we've ever seen. So that was good news and speaks to the conditions we had out there this year. So this was the tributary stream monitoring we did in 2018, and we also did this in 2017. We did 2 sites between the dams, Soda Creek and Benmore Creek, and 2 below Cape Horn Dam, Thomas Creek and Garcia Creek. These are drainages that have low summer, fall flows, but they still maintain relatively cool temperatures due to the fact that they're mostly spring fed. We found good populations of juvenile steelhead in these tributaries, especially Benmore Creek. Even after being burned over in the 2018 fire, we went out there after the fire and found still upwards of 75 to 100 steelhead in a 30-meter reach. So that was a really good sign. We have limited presence of pike minnow in these tributary streams, which is also good. And we pretty much confirmed that these tributaries are still functioning as an important rearing habitat for steelhead in the upper Eel River watershed. Another thing that I should mention in regard to the numbers that we were seeing in fish in 2018 is that typically this summer fish rearing is conducted in the first 2 weeks of August, but due to the Mendocino fire complex, we had to postpone those studies until September and October. So we were later in the year than we have been historically, and it was also a low water year. But again, we were pleasantly surprised when we got up there in October to see those tributaries were still running, even though it was only a CFS flow or so. But the reaches are 30 meters on the tributary streams versus 100 meters on the main stem. We do the kind of qualitative snorkeling survey above the electrofishing reach. The surveyors are just kind of spot checking for what type of fish species we're seeing, and we typically went upstream either up into the first fish passage barrier that we could get to, or an hour or so of hiking upstream. Pike minnow monitoring. We do pike minnow monitoring between Scott Dam and Cape Horn Dam. We had 2 sites that we did in 2018, and this is done using a cataract and a barge. We have a generator that sits back here in this barge, and we got an oarsman and a shocker and a netter out on this barge, and we're basically putting this thing into the river and kind of floating downstream and seeing what we can pick up. It's definitely a qualitative effort, but it's been consistent over the years. And so when we do this monitoring, we are picking up adult pike minnow because we are fishing in deeper water pool habitat. The raft electrofisher has more power than the backpacks. And then we also pick up some steelhead while we're out there too. So this is the historical raft electrofishing catch data for surveys during August in the main Stem Eel River above Cape Horn Dam. This is Sacramento pike minnow, and on here we've got the 3 sites. So historically we did 3 sites of pike minnow monitoring, but I think beginning in 2017, we cut that down to 2 sites, and that was part of the trade-offs, but also we were dealing with some issues with access and safety at the upper site. So we are now just doing the 2 sites, Eel River above Bucknell Creek and Eel River below Trout Creek. And as you can see here, we're picking up pike minnow at all these sites. I guess you could say typically we get more pike minnow below Trout Creek, but we're also getting them above Bucknell Creek as well. I'll point out again here before I go over to the steelhead slide that this y-axis is higher than the steelhead slide. So same sites, but this is now for steelhead, and you can see the y-axis is not as big as it was with the pike minnow, so we're getting less steelhead, which is what we expect out there, unfortunately. And we're getting more steelhead at the site above Bucknell pretty consistently. That does change from year to year, but in 2018 we had a pretty good catch of steelhead out there. We had 8 steelhead at eel above Bucknell, and I think we had 5 below Trout Creek, and there was some good sized steelhead that we picked up out there. So pike minnow suppression is something we started this year again in 2019. You may or may not know that the project does have a FERC-approved pike minnow suppression and adaptive management plan that was approved back in 2005. We first tried pike minnow suppression in 2006 using some gill nets, and there was take of steelhead at the time. So PG&E and the agencies and Round Valley Indian tribes decided that we were not going to continue to do pike minnow suppression using that technique, at least at the time, because of the risk of taking steelhead. So since 2006, we haven't done any pike minnow suppression. We've continued to do the monitoring, but haven't actually done suppression. So this year, as part of the trade-offs, we decided to pick that back up, and we got out there this year, and we're doing a combination of raft and boat electrofishing at 3 sites, and we've done that in July and August, and we have one more round of that coming up in September. And we're doing 3 sites. Like I said, we're doing the tailwater pool below Scott Dam, Van Arsdale Reservoir, and the tailwater pool below Cape Dam. And it's fair to mention that the approved FERC plan does focus between the dams, and project facilities, so that's where we're focusing our efforts at this time. So far, overall, I'd say we've had a relatively low catch of adult pike minnow. The first effort we had in July, we didn't have access to an electrofishing boat, so we were just using the cataraft, and we're working in some pretty big water, so it wasn't as efficient as we had hoped. We did use a boat electrofisher in this month, just a couple weeks ago, and we did get a moderate catch with the boat in Van Arsdale Reservoir. So we're dealing with issues as far as access with the boat below Scott Dam and below Cape Horn Dam. There's no real feasible way to launch a boat, so we're kind of stuck at this time using the boat in the reservoir. But we are working on our techniques and brainstorming on ideas that we could potentially get more success in the other sites. So stay tuned on pike minnow suppression. And the good news so far is that using the electrofishing as a technique for suppression, we haven't had any steelhead mortality yet. So, and that's it for relicensing or licensing studies. I'll turn it over to Larry for relicensing.
Good morning. I'm Larry Wise again. I'm also a fisheries biologist with PG&E. I've been working on Potter Valley for 2.5, 3 years as we started ramping up for our relicensing within PG&E. So we began the relicensing process, as Paul said, back in 2017. We filed our study plans for approval with FERC. Those study plans were developed in collaboration with our stakeholder group, including agencies and a lot of the people that are here today. Those study plans were approved in February by FERC in February 2018. And then we began our implementing those studies in 2018, and then in 2019, PG&E made the decision to withdraw its NOI, and those studies were halted at that time. Our relicensing studies incorporated a number of different resource areas, including aquatic biology, terrestrial biology, cultural resources, land resources, and then recreational resources. Today I'm just going to focus on what's happened with the aquatic biology resources. Under the heading of aquatic biology resources, we had a number of different studies ranging from hydrology flows and project operations to water temperature and water quality, some geomorphological processes, and then a variety of studies related to fish and aquatic habitat, both within Lake Pillsbury and in the river downstream. We looked at fish passage, though that was largely done as part of the ad hoc group. And then we did surveys on amphibians and aquatic reptiles and also aquatic mollusks. So all of those studies were initiated in 2018, and we were moving towards getting those reports summarized and whatnot when PG&E, we had the campfire in 2018, and we were looking at, PG&E was looking at some significant liabilities associated with that, and decided it was filing bankruptcy, and at that time decided to withdraw its NOI. So those studies kind of got put on hold for a while, or that summarization got put on hold for a while we were working through that process. And so that kind of got delayed a little bit. And so we so now we've restarted the process. We're in the process of trying to memorialize the technical studies that were performed to date, just get that data recorded and the methods and such recorded so that we can hand that off to the ONLI partners and others that might be interested in the project, and we're working on a process for doing that, and then making sure that they have access to all of that data in a way that's understandable to them, so they can move forward with that. We've got some field equipment that's still out in the watershed that we're working on getting removed. And then we're working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Round Valley Indian Tribe to transfer a few of the flow gauges and turbidity monitoring stations that we have out there in the watershed to them for their use going forward. As you know, looking forward. Okay, so turn that over to Mike Schoner, who's going to cover our future activities in the watershed.
Well, thank you very much, all three of you. I've got a request for a break.
We don't have to, as long as you have coffee.
Oh, okay, great. So great, we're fine. We have coffee. We're good to go. So I would thank you very much. Any questions or comments from the scientists?
I just wanted to say that the Lake Commissioner, Jimmy Smith, would certainly be ecstatic that the pike minnow suppression is back in place. He would, yes.
Yeah, and I do want to add that I was excited to hear that too, and I wish you the best on that. But I also want to reiterate how important the studies that you have been doing all along and the handover now will be to the future discussions as we go forward. It's a lot of scientific work that's been going on, and I appreciate all of your efforts. And I'll be sorry to see Paul go, but I'm sure he's happy to go into retirement, right?
Well, we might get him one more time here.
He's not going to get off that easy. We'll be calling him. I know where he lives.
But you bring up a good point about the studies that we've conducted, and I might just add that we've got a very extensive data set for the project, and that data is going to be very useful for everybody ongoing in terms of evaluating effects of the project and what can be done on the Eel River side. So keep that in mind, and I'm sure everybody's well aware of all that data that's out there. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you again. Thank you, Andrew.
Yes. With the 2018 Mendo complex, I had heard and couldn't get up there and haven't gone since the fire, but that there was a lot of debris in the lake and conditions weren't good. Do you have any information about today, present time conditions, Lake Pillsbury?
I could add that I did go up and do a bald eagle survey with one of our contractors, and we went up into the, I think it was the Eel River fork of the lake, and there was a huge debris jam up there that he's been doing the surveys for several years, or many years up there, and he said, he hadn't seen it that bad, but that was just woody debris floating on top. That's the only observation that I have to add.
The good. I was just going to add that the good news this year is that not only did we fill the reservoir and spilled up there, but we've maintained relatively high reservoir levels all the way up until now. I believe we're still about 2 feet above the spill crest on the dam. Spill crest is at what we consider to be 1,900 feet, and the actual maximum that we reached this year was 1909.3 or thereabouts. We always keep a bit of a buffer so we don't go above the gates, which are at 1910. So anyway, that's really good from the standpoint of both debris and water quality in terms of maintaining a large body of water up there, and I'm unaware of any major issues within the lake at this time.
And I would assume that from the Mendo complex fire, probably the vegetation or the lack of is causing, the springs and what have you to continue flowing more because there isn't the plants and trees to suck it up. I would assume is probably flowing more.
Yeah, it could be in some of those drainages. The fire itself was uneven in terms of its burn and intensity, and so you've got some areas that have really been, burned down to the earth there, and the sort of effects you're talking about might be expected in those kind of situations. And in other areas, there was a relatively light burn. Where you still have vegetation in place and vegetation sprouting. So you can have a variety of effects up there.
Sure, and it depends if they were back burning to try to stop the fire from approaching certain areas as well. Is a lighter burn.
Yes, I just had one thing. And thank you for giving this presentation. I appreciate all the work that you've done. And in many projects, there's a lot of studies that are done, and with regard to the agenda item before this, the feasibility studies, would PG&E be able to give these studies to provide for that aspect, so that way, because all this work's been done, we would hate to lose some of that.
No, that is the intent, is to provide that information to the NOI partner so that they can use that information going forward.
And I hate to do, I kind of assumed that, but I wanted to make sure I just asked. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and that's the process that Larry was talking about at the end there that we've got right now trying to close out these studies and summarize the results and be able to provide work products to the applicants as they move forward. But we're still in the process with our contractor of pulling that information together.
And that's Cardinal?
That's Cardinal, correct.
Well, thank you very much, and I would like to welcome Mike Schoner, who is the Director of Strategic Agreements, to give us a little update on PG&E's changed roles in the relicensing project. Let's just do the whole thing with Mike and then have public comment, if that's all right. Great, thank you.
Good morning, and thank you again. My name is Mike Schoner. I'm a director in PG&E's Power Generation Department. My role is a couple-fold in this organization. I oversee the development and execution of strategies for numerous of PG&E's assets in our generation portfolio, Potter Valley project included, of course, as well as I oversee the implementation of our land conservation commitment, which is where we're putting conservation easements on all of our watershed lands around our entire territory. So have a kind of a broad role with these things. I would like to start with a reinforcement of Janet Pauley's characterization of this process as being unique. It's unique not only for the FERC, but it is unique for PG&E as well. To my knowledge, this is the first time we've ever withdrawn a notice of intent to acquire or to relicense a project, especially this far in advance of the actual application process. From a FERC perspective, it's also unusual in the sense, and I think it was raised earlier, is that there technically isn't a license applicant. It's a proposal that's very unique. It creates a proxy for an entity who will ultimately acquire a license. But the regulations aren't clear. This is really not contemplated in the Federal Power Act anywhere. And so a lot of what's happening right now is sort of on the fly and being force-fit into a process that really wasn't designed to accommodate it. And so I wanted to characterize that as we talk about the path forward, and to say that we're not exactly sure how this is going to flow and how the process is going to work at FERC. We're very hopeful that following the completion of the feasibility study that it will become more clear as to who the entity will be ultimately acquiring the project, and then also what the relicensing process will look like. And so I just wanted to share that. From the perspective of the owner-operator licensee of the project, I do want to clarify that PG&E will continue to own and operate this project consistent with the current license until one or two things happen. Either a new license is issued and the project is transferred to the new licensee, or in the case that a new license is not issued, where no one finally applies, or FERC does not issue a license, until such time the project is decommissioned and PG&E receives a decommissioning order from the FERC. So we don't know how long either of those processes will take. Our experience has been that it can be anywhere from 5 to, we have projects that took nearly 30 years to license. We're very hopeful this one is not falling into anywhere near that category. But the FERC process, depending upon the complexity, the challenges with relicensing can take a time to complete. License application, of course, will be filed in April of 2022, and then FERC will go through its process. The other thing that I wanted to share, there is a comment here that PG&E will serve as a neutral party in the FERC licensing process. There are really kind of two elements to that with respect to how it interacts with parties in the relicensing process. And in fact, this has been our position since we withdrew our application, is that we need to be fair and equitable to all parties and participants in this process. So in advance of the filing of the current notice of intent, we have to share the same information. We have to work the same with all of those entities who would have filed a notice of intent. It turns out that there was only one, so that wasn't a challenge. And then going forward in the relicensing process, again, being neutral doesn't mean that we won't have an opinion. And we won't share that opinion, and we won't share our perspectives. What it does mean is that we won't be the new license applicant, and therefore we won't be the project proponent. And so our role is really as a key stakeholder, as the owner and operator of this existing project, but we are not the license applicant. And so there's a distinct difference, right? We will participate in that process as an owner operator of the project, not as the new license proponent. And so from a FERC perspective, there are distinct roles and responsibilities of the license applicants, and PG&E won't have those anymore. So I just wanted to be clear of what we meant here. And then finally, again, as we discussed, our goal is to ensure that all of the information that the NOI parties and ultimately the licensing party need to have, they will have. We are working with them now to develop an engagement process, the protocols that are necessary to share data, including such things as the development and execution of non-disclosure agreements for information that is sensitive for various reasons, whether it's cultural resource information that can really only be received by certain entities, or whether it's facility security information that you want to make sure is protected. We're working through that process now with the NOI partners. One of the uniqueness issues here is that these entities are not technically going to be the licensees and acting as a proxy. We're having to figure out how to share that information in a way that ensures people get what they need, but also doesn't compromise the information or the process. And so that's been a little bit of the challenge, especially when you have private entities and public entities all working together. Everybody has different rules, as you know, around Records Act and disclosure. And so we're working through that process now with a number of entities to try to figure out how best to accommodate this process and still to manage the flow of data in a way that protects that data. We're also beginning to do other things like initiating the study process, or responding to requests to initiate study processes, such as the collection of soils behind the dams to understand the content of that soil. We really weren't in a position to do that until the FERC process was defined and the entities were established. And so now we've initiated that process with the NOI partners to get them underway so that they can begin that work. We'll also, as part of our work going forward, we'll be facilitating access to not only information, but to the physical facilities, right? As folks need to do these studies, they'll need to access and understand what exists, the quality and condition of assets, and we'll begin to do that. PG&E will continue to participate in the appropriate project meetings, whether those are public meetings or meetings with the licensees or proposed licensees. The difference is that we won't be conducting the relicensing studies. We'll be providing subject matter expertise, input, information that we have available, but that would be directed by the new licensees in their study process. Let me see, what else do I want to make sure? And the last thing that I wanted to mention is that there was a mention of studies continuing, and the existing studies continuing at least until 2022. Whatever is required by the license until that license is transferred will continue. So if there are studies that go on with respect to our day-to-day operations and compliance with the license, that will continue because we will be complying with those license requirements. And I think the important thing to note is that as new information is generated as well through our day-to-day operations, we will be sharing that information with the new licensees as well. I think that's all I wanted to share. It is a new and different role for PG&E. We're not necessarily accustomed to being on the sidelines either. But what I would characterize is that as hard as this seems to be and will be, I think this broad coalition of regional entities coming together in this way and in this process truly will yield the best outcome for the Eel and Russian River stakeholders. I think what everyone hopefully is beginning to see is that an electric utility trying to drive a process that involves these regional entities without having representation of those regional entities in the decision process is a pretty challenging thing. And so I do think that the structure that's being established here ultimately will yield the best outcome for a balanced solution. So I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I really appreciate that presentation, and I know you brought up a couple of interesting points that I have interested myself. I'd like to invite my colleagues if they have any questions or comments. Commissioner Gore.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to see you. It's fascinating because I think about 4 or 5 years ago when I started as a supervisor, talking with PG&E representatives about this project was, one of the most kind of crazy things to try and figure out as we were going into the, thing. It was one of the most opaque, complex, and sometimes difficult things. And now, working so much with PG&E on public safety power shutdown and liability and other issues, it's a pleasure to talk to you about the Potter Valley project. It's quite nice to have something to talk about other than wildfire threat and liability issues and other things. And I just want to restate, we want to make sure that we're, those of us who have been involved in the planning process, we're trying to link up as best as possible. That's the intention, I think, of the folks. I'll speak for myself. I can't speak for my colleagues here, but, we have a lot of staff who are working. From my part, Sonoma Water is doing a ton of work and has done a huge amount of legal background. And, now we're going out with RFQs and other things. And, I assume we're getting close to a point where the planning group will be in formal discussions with PG&E with respect to background information, studies, and projections going forward with feasibility and more and more and more. And so, just the request is to stay very close to us. Let us know how we can work best with you. We need that door to be as open as possible, in spite of bankruptcy proceedings, in spite of legal discussions, in spite of PSPS concerns. We have to compartmentalize these discussions as best possible, and I just want to make sure, the best of intentions from our side. You guys worked really hard to kind of flush us out to get us to the point where we took responsibility for a regional asset, if you want to call it that. And obviously that was accelerated with the orphaning of the project. And so here we are. But I don't really have any more words than that, just to say, let us know what you need from us. We want to work directly with you. We don't want to, I don't want to, be going and trying to ping. I've asked a couple times, hey, well, do I need to go talk to Katie, who's in the CEO's office? And they're like, no, we're doing good. We're lining up. So I just want to reiterate both a thanks and a request. That's it.
Yeah, and thank you. And I would like to let you know that we have established some internal structure to create a single point of contact that will, I'm calling it our air traffic controller, because there will be a lot of things to do. We have met with representatives from the NOI partner group already and have asked the same of that team so that we can be as efficient and effective in our communications and conveyance of information as possible. And I know that they have been undertaking work to make that happen as well.
Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. I am pleased to hear PG&E will share sensitive data and information because, as you well know, Inland Water and Power Commission was trying to go towards submitting an indicative proposal early on and had that rug pulled out from under us like 4 days before it was due. So I was a bit dismayed at that, but I do look forward in having a positive relationship as we move into the future.
Great, thank you. We look for the same thing.
Yeah, and Mike, the thought that came to me is hearing Janet describe it as unique was one thing from one perspective, and hearing it from your perspective was actually very fascinating to me, because it is a bit of a conundrum that there really isn't an agent yet. It's sort of a proxy, as you mentioned. That was a good word, and it's in formation, and that does raise issues in terms of non-disclosure agreements and those kinds of things, and who do you share the information with. So I really appreciate the fact that you're open to finding a solution to that, because of course the information is important. So yeah, it's really important as we move forward. Thank you. If you wouldn't mind to hang around, I would like to invite people of the public, if you have any questions, either regarding the scientific studies or Mike's presentation.
Scott Grayson, Conservation Director, Friends of the Eel River. I'm delighted to hear that PG&E has conducted electrofishing without taking any steelhead, but I'd be even more interested to know how many pike minnow they caught. And I would respectfully request the Commission ask PG&E to disclose that number. I need to talk for a minute about mercury. Mercury is a potent neurotoxin that can profoundly affect vertebrates of all kinds, especially in our juvenile stages. Mercury is found in our native rock. In addition, mercury has historically been mined in the Potter Valley Project area. There's at least one historic mine between the Rice Fork and the main stem. Now, elemental mercury is hazardous. You don't want your kids touching it, but it's the methylated form of the metal you really want to watch out for. Now, methylated mercury is formed in anoxic conditions by bacteria that can't tolerate oxygen. Anoxic conditions like those found in the bottom of reservoirs. Thus, methylmercury formation is a direct environmental consequence of Scott Dam and the Lake Pillsbury Reservoir. Now, we've repeatedly raised concerns about the accumulation of methylmercury in the sediments below the Lake Pillsbury Reservoir. As PG&E noted in the pre-application document, tissue samples of Lake Pillsbury fish showed high mercury concentrations, including the highest concentration for an individual fish in statewide sampling. That's a direct quote. Now, we specifically requested study plans to evaluate mercury levels and their effects on public health, on fish, and on wildlife during the FERC relicensing process. We were dismayed that FERC refused to order mercury studies because PG&E did not wish to undertake them. Now, the State Coastal the State Coastal Conservancy has now come forward to conduct mercury studies on its own dime. This is an urgently needed component to determine what we're going to do with Scott Dam and how to handle those sediments. Unfortunately, PG&E has continued to refuse permission to the Coastal Conservancy to sample in the reservoir. We respectfully urge PG&E to make every possible effort to allow this critical study to go forward before the rainy season. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
Hi, well, it's almost afternoon. I'll still say good morning, Commissioners. David Keller, Bay Area Director, Friends of the Eel. Thank you for having this collection of presentations. Question for PG&E that I hope you would follow through on. Everybody would like to see an establishment of water supply reliability, and yet we can't really establish whether or not the water supply that is behind Pillsbury or in Lake Pillsbury, whether it's for environmental purposes or for transfer to the Russian River, we can't determine whether or not any of that supply is reliable without understanding fully the condition of Scott Dam. That has all been hidden behind CEII rules with FERC and PG&E's decisions to use that shield to keep information from the public, from peer review, from stakeholders downstream. So I'm glad to hear that PG&E is talking about an openness in providing security information. What I'd like to know is whether or not they will produce for the Commission and for the Planning Agreement Group all CEII data relating to dam safety, security, and stability, all internal studies that were done by PG&E with engineering consultants. We know of at least 2 papers that were done that were not filed with PG&E, one referring to reinforcing the dam with concrete, and the other addressing erosion around the wing walls. Also, we know that there is landslide information around particularly the South Slope landslide, and there's also seismic information. And we know that a lot of that has not been filed with FERC because it's internal. And I think as the commission and particularly as the planning group goes forward, it's really critical to understand and be able to review with peer consultants what this information shows about the stability and reliability of Scott Dam and therefore Lake Pillsbury, and whether or not PG&E is going to shoulder any liabilities for that, or whether those liabilities will be passed on to some public entity, JPA or otherwise, who might be interested in purchasing the project. So if you would make that request, I would make the same request to the members of the planning agreement, and it would be very helpful as this process moves forward. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Vivian Hallowell, Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations and Institute for Fisheries Resources. It's a lot of good information that is being presented today, and I'm really glad that these videos will go where the public can see them. The studies that have been done and are continuing monitoring by PG&E that will be then required to be done by the new entity that takes on Potter Valley Project looks like an expensive proposition. And I'm interested to see how it develops that will be paid for in the long term. The data that's collected is really important to understand how to support fish population recovery in the eel. And also, I want to reiterate the importance of the mercury study and the dam safety information in order to understand how this group can, what will be the responsibilities and liabilities of the new entity that takes on this old facility. The power generation facility is old. The tunnel is old. The Van Arsdale, Cape Horn Dam, the fish ladder often doesn't work. It gets plugged up. It gets turned off at high water when the fish are trying to get up. So it doesn't really function very well, and that needs to be improved in many ways. And there are many challenges for getting fish to access the streams above where Lake Pillsbury is, including the breeding grounds for the pike minnow in the lake and bass in the lake. And the problem is not so much getting the adult fish up, but getting the baby fish back down through this predator sink. So we have a lot of challenges in front of us. There's much work that needs to be done. I want to point out the complementary studies that are being done in the lower Eel River by the Eel River Recovery Project with over 100 temperature gauges and fish counts, dive studies for pike minnow and salmon. The ocean fishery is not really a good way to determine the health of the river populations because our fishing seasons are so limited that it's a very minor sampling. The ocean fish this year of Chinook have been all down south of Bodega Bay in San Francisco. They never really came up to the northern part where we're used to seeing them off Fort Bragg and Eureka and Oregon. Where are all the baby fish that were almost big enough last year? They're swimming around somewhere else. So there are a lot of things that we don't know, and we look forward to continuing these studies as we go forward. Thank you.
Any further public comment on this item? Bring it back to the board. So there were a few questions in there, and I would ask PG&E if you could at least address them in whatever way you can. There were 3 items brought up. How many pike minnow were caught, and concerns about the water supply, the water and the mercury, and the existing studies that have been done, how available they will be as we move forward.
I can answer the question related to the pike minnow numbers so far this year. And I'll also mention that all that data will be made available when the reports are filed with FERC next year. But so far this year, like we mentioned in the presentation, we had a pretty low catch with the raft. I would say, as far as adult pike minnow go, 25 to 50 with the raft, the first effort. And then this most recent effort, which I mentioned was more successful, but still moderate. We probably removed 50 to 75 adult pike minnow from the Van Arsdale Reservoir. So it's, like I also said, we're still refining our methods, and it's an adaptive management program that we're going to be working on as time goes on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Paul?
I'd just like to add one more thing to that. The effort this year was primarily an exploratory process, trying to determine what will work best for removal of pike minnow. And I think we've learned quite a bit so far here in terms of where the fish are located, and the best techniques to use. And obviously the boat electrofisher is working better than the raft electrofisher. And so we've got one more sampling effort coming up in September. National Marine Fisheries Service, Josh Fuller, will be joining us for that effort. And we'll continue with our discovery process here in terms of working out what works best. And as Andrew was indicating, it is an adaptive management process, and as we learn more, we'll be able to apply the appropriate techniques and do a better job.
Thank you, Paul. Any other thoughts on those other studies and their availability?
Yeah, so I guess with respect to the Mercury studies, as I'd indicated, we are initiating that process now with the NOI partners, and so that will be underway. With respect to the dam studies, again, our commitment is to provide information to the parties who need that information to make decisions. I think that the challenge is always around the public availability of some of those studies, and we'll have to manage through that process, but our goal is to ensure that the NOI partners who are developing this work have the information that they need to conduct their work.
Thank you very much. Any further thoughts from the Commission? Okay. Thank you very much, all of you. Really appreciate being kept up to date in this ever-evolving process. So that brings us to an update now from Congressman Huffman's office, and I really appreciate John Driscoll driving down here early today and sitting through all of this, and very anxious to hear your update on the ad hoc committee.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I appreciate you having me here, and believe me, it was my pleasure to hear all that great information. So I appreciate you having that forum available to get that. So thank you again for allowing me to come and speak on behalf of Congressman Huffman, who's really been deeply involved in what he hopes will be the next life of the Potter Valley project. As mentioned, in 2017, the Congressman convened the Potter Valley Project Ad Hoc Committee, which is a group of key stakeholders representing the diverse interests of the Eel and Russian River basins. The committee was formed while PG&E was still trying to relicense the project. And as you know, that dynamic has changed significantly, and PG&E has since withdrawn its notice of intent. It's also filed for bankruptcy protection. So those changed circumstances pretty understandably invigorated the ad hoc committee, which now has to consider the potential for significant changes to the project. It was mentioned several times about the goals and principles that the ad hoc committee has adopted. And I'm just I'll read the co-equal goals and then just summarize the other goals that have been agreed to by all the parties that have been around that table. So, and I want to read the co-equal goals verbatim. So the first is improve fish passage and habitat on the Eel River, sufficient to support recovery of naturally reproducing, self-sustaining, and harvestable native anadromous fish populations, including migratory access upstream and downstream at current project dam locations. And the second is to minimize or avoid adverse impacts to water supply reliability, fisheries, water quality, and recreation in the Russian River and Eel River basins. So those are the two linchpin principles that the ad hoc committee members have agreed to. The other goals are to respect tribal rights, minimize adverse impacts to Lake County and Lake Pillsbury, ensure accountable governance, jointly pursue public funding, ensure that implementation of fish passage improvements happens in parallel with water supply solutions in the Russian River basin. And so those are those founding principles, and anybody who's on that ad hoc committee has signed off on those principles and will use as guiding force going forward. It's also included in the NOI parties' applications as well. So the NOI parties that are right now out there really were born out of the ad hoc committee. And as we've already kind of stated, it was Cal Trout, Sonoma Water, and Inland Water that stepped up initially and are now joined by Humboldt County and expected to be the Brown Valley Indian tribes as well. That planning group is really going to use the significant body of work done by the ad hoc on fish passage and water supply opportunities. And I would really encourage anybody with an interest in this project and these proceedings to visit the website for the ad hoc committee, which is www.pottervalleyproject.org. There's really been a kind of a wealth of information that has been collected and organized by our facilitator, Gina Bartlett, with CBI. And she's just done a great job in providing the information that's been developed by those working groups, other information that is salient to the project, and summaries, excellent summaries of the meetings that have happened so far. So that's just a really important resource I'd encourage people to visit. So, moving forward, the ad hoc members and the planning group are really going to have to decide how the committee continues to work to inform proposals and how to move the process forward. We expect to have significant discussions soon with the ad hoc committee as to just what kind of role it's played, if there will be modifications to the ad hoc committee, and just how it can help inform the process. So as you know, FERC has allowed the NOI group to move forward with the relicensing process for the time being. And as Mike Schoner indicated, it's a bit of an unusual situation in that you don't have an actual applicant group as it did when PG&E was still interested. And that does make things complicated. There's going to be some important things that need to happen, including there's going to have to be some type of entity that's formed to actually make that application. And that will be an interesting and likely complicated process from a lot of different levels. And one of those is because FERC is not used to this arrangement. And I will say that in my discussions with FERC and in my experience with the situation on the Klamath River, FERC is really not used to transferring a project to a non-utility. And that presents a number of complications. I will say that on the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, which was formed out of the Klamath Hydropower Settlement Agreement groups, it has the two states, it has tribes, it has fishing groups, et cetera, and a board that's very high level. It's a very highly functioning and very well-funded organization, and FERC has definitely given them a lot of scrutiny over being able to take over that project and remove those dams on that river. So I would expect that there will be a lot of scrutiny on this, but I will say that the the entity that will be formed, it really carries a lot of weight, having those diverse interests, which is very similar to the Klamath. And also having the ad hoc committee as a reviewing committee for that work also carry a lot of weight with FERC, I'm sure. So I think it's very important, and it's important that we keep going with that work. There are, the ad hoc committee is certainly just one of the number of forums that people can use to participate in this process. The full and public FERC process still has to be adhered to, regardless of what the ad hoc committee does, what form the planning group takes, or what proposal is submitted. For example, FERC must still consult with tribes under the National Historic Preservation Act, and so that's a essential thing to know. The FERC retains that regulatory jurisdiction over this, and has to provide all kinds of notice, all kinds of meetings, all kinds of consultation with various groups under a whole host of different laws. And the planning group, of course, will have to follow that public FERC process, and the public will be able to weigh in through that process. As we're doing here, the Eel Russian River Commission is an excellent entity to be providing information and discussion on the progress of these groups. We've seen it today. It's going to be an incredible rundown of some of the most important work that's been happening. And it's also a public forum as well. So the planning group is going to need to complete its feasibility study by April 2020, excuse me, and file their final licensing application by April 2022. So that's an aggressive timeline, to say the least. And that planning group is going to have to remain nimble and functioning at a very high level to be able to get that done. But regardless, the process is really now just beginning. And I can tell you for sure that Congressman Huffman is very hopeful that a two-basin solution can be found as we forge ahead. And he plans to continue working very diligently to help that effort succeed. So thank you very much for having me again today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, John. I've been really looking forward to hearing. It's just, this whole thing is like, let's make sure we know every single aspect of this process. And I know what a tremendous amount of work that you and the congressman have put into this, and really been kind of a backbone in a way to encouraging this regional approach, which, as it turns out, looks like it is the way to go. So I would ask my colleagues if you have any questions or comments for John, or for John to bring back to the congressman.
Yeah. Thank you very much for being here, John. Really appreciate all the work, and that we've been able to figure out a way, even though it's been stumbling around at different times because for all kinds of different reasons, but found a way to honor the ad hoc and the work, and then honor also that bringing the planning agreement in, and then signatories and other things. We've been able to have both the polite and direct conversations that I think we've needed to have up until now. And I think the one thing for me is obviously, he knows this, but I want to thank Jared and you for your work on this. But number two is same kind of point as before with some of the other discussions about signatories and how many people come into the planning agreement. I think it's going to be really interesting that we have to work together on figuring out what are the different forums and how do they mesh well, because it's going to be a long time process. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks that, like, every time I come to these meetings, let me just say, I see the value in the Eel Russian River Commission meetings. But when I'm not here, I wonder, I oftentimes say, God, should we just get rid of this thing and then recreate it as the JPA that it needs to be? But I think a lot of those whatever we do with that, whatever we do with the ad hoc becoming a TAC or a technical advisory council or not, whatever we do with the formal FERC process, those kind of 3 different entities, we're going to have to figure out how we adapt and move them all so that we have the right forums. Like for instance, right now it's working, right? Because you have a public forum here, you have the ad hoc, which is the big working group, and then you have the planning group, right? And so you have this thing lined up, but as soon as we get into the process with the feasibility study of identifying what the right construct is for going forward, I think that'll, be a kink in the line that'll have us have to reevaluate all these too. So looking forward to walking down that road with you guys and figuring it out. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yes, and I just wanted to reiterate, for Lake County in general, the co-equal goals are important to us. I know that I'm not sure exactly how Jim Steele came to the table with some of these meetings in the ad hoc, but I know for me, I've been trying to accumulate as much information as I can and try to come to the table in a general aspect. So they are important to us. I know that when we discussed our resolution, Lake County had highlighted that the other goal that involved Lake Pillsbury, but it's because it's in our county, and there's a lot of trauma, with Lake County losing its water rights before to another county. So it's just some of that. That's all. But all in all, I come to the table in a very amicable way and synergistic way. So.
One issue I had going back to that, the quirkiness of this or the uniqueness of it. Do you have any thoughts on how we can get through that? The fact that we're not actually a party yet. We're just a planning group, a proxy for the eventual potential licensee. Have you any thoughts on that?
Well, I would not pretend to be a qualified advisor as to how you would form.
In terms of dealing with FERC.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I think you just have to you have to form an entity that is workable, is nimble, and is can show that it is qualified to take over a project and be a licensee. And I think there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. On the Klamath, they formed a corporation, a 501c3 that was able to take that over. That's a little bit of a different situation. It spans 2 states and all that. So whatever form that group forms for the Potter Valley project, it's just got to be something that's FERC can wrap its head around and have faith in.
Well, thank you very much, John. I really appreciate you taking the time. Is there any comment or questions from the public on this item? Seeing none, again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Commissioners.
And that will bring us to our final item. We're back into science here, and appreciate a presentation from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Alan Ringer is the fisheries biologist, and Dave Kataniak is a project manager for the studies that they're doing in the Lower River.
Madam Commissioner, Madam Chairman, Commissioners, thanks for the opportunity for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to present monitoring activities that we've conducted on the Eel River. They're relevant to the Potter Valley project. They were initiated as a study component of the FERC relicensing. The department, in partnership with Pacific Gas and Electric, and when PG&E had to change their role and discontinue their component of the study, the department continued that study as it was a central component to understanding the project, and it has management benefits to the department outside of relicensing. And so I'm Alan Ringer, California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm a fisheries supervisor for Southern Humboldt and Mendocino County. David Kataniak is a fisheries biologist. He led that monitoring effort, and I'll let him give a presentation. We have 4 copies of a scientific report that came out of that available to you that I can pass on to you. And I'll let David take it from here.
Thank you, Alan.
Well, thank you, Board of Supervisors, for letting us speak today. I'm going to give a brief talk on our adult salmon and sonar monitoring program in the lower Mainstem Eel River. I was the project lead on this project. So, for our overview, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife operated a dual frequency identification sonar camera, which is DITSN for short, to enumerate adult and jack salmon escapement into the lower Mainstem Eel River above the confluence with the South Fork Eel River during the fall and winter of 2018 and 2019. This was a pilot year for the project, and the primary intent was to estimate returns of California coastal Chinook salmon, and if possible, estimate returns of steelhead trout. So our results from the study, we estimated an abundance of Chinook salmon returning to the Mainstem Eel River above the confluence with the South Fork Eel River from November 15th through December 31st of 2018 equaled 3,844 fish, and that was a 95% confidence interval. So, and then just to talk a little bit about the project and how we went about getting that number. And so sonar technology on the Eel River, there was actually 2 projects sonar projects on the Eel River. One was on the Mainstem Eel River, the one that I ran, and there was also a South Fork Eel River one that California Trout ran with the California Conservation Corps. So for the Mainstem Eel River, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife provided project oversight and staffing, as well as equipment and additional funding for implementation of the project. Trout Unlimited was partnered with us and was providing consultation and additional equipment purchasing through its donors. And initially, Pacific Gas and Electric Company, via their contractor Cardno Consulting, provided initial equipment and staffing funding before they pulled out of the project due to their bankruptcy filing, and that was in late January. So the projects began in mid to late November with the onset of the Chinook salmon run, and counted fall Chinook salmon and steelhead trout until mid-February of 2019. I'll discuss why we didn't run to the end of the steelhead run, which typically goes through beginning of or in early April. The DITSN cameras were deployed at 2 sites in the watershed, which collectively provide salmon escapement data for a large portion of the Eel River watershed. These studies were, they're important because on the Mainstem Eel River, there really hasn't been a study that's looked at the population of the entire Mainstem Eel River. Certainly PG&E has, as they've discussed, have done consistent studies since the 1980s in the upper watershed that have given an idea of the populations in the upper watershed. And there's the Van Arsdale Fish Station, which counts fish. But that really only gives an idea of fish in a very upper part of the watershed. And this study wanted to capture the entire Mainstem Eel River population, and that really hasn't been done ever. So this is the location of the counting stations. The one on the Mainstem that I ran is right here, which is 4 miles upstream of the confluence with the South Fork. And here's the other one, and that one is the one that was run by California Trout and the California Conservation Corps. So as you can see, this one is capturing the entire Eel River Mainstem population of Chinook that are running up the Mainstem and into the North Fork, Middle Fork, and Outlet Creek, whereas the South Fork DITSN captures the entire South Fork population. Basically, there's no tributaries below our cameras that have spawning streams, so in the Mainstem itself, we were capturing the entire population. This is just an aerial view of where the camera was located. So we were able to get permission with Humboldt Redwood Company to have our camera on their, basically on their property via access through a locked gate. This is like a large river bar where there's, it's a remote location 4 miles upstream of the South Fork Yale, where there's no infrastructure or anything like that around there. It's in this run habitat, so like the fish are committed once they generally reach the area of the camera to going upstream, and there's like a pool up here, and generally they don't run back down past the camera. Once they commit to go, for the most part, once they commit to go past the camera, they remain above the camera. This is a photo of the site in this last summer before the rains came. So this is during the low water. But basically the camera location is right over here, and like the sonar shoots across to the other bank, and you're able to basically capture any image of anything going up the river like that. Here's the sonar field setup and operation. So as I mentioned, the site is located on a large river bar without access to a power source. A temporary place structure houses the associated sonar equipment. So this was a cargo trailer in which we, with the help of Trout Unlimited, purchased this cargo trailer, and we were able to, with their help as well, install solar panels on top of it that provided the power and cabling. There was a laptop and other sonar equipment stored in the cargo trailer, and cabling ran out to where the camera was. This is the box that holds the camera, and the camera fits in there. And this is a photo of the camera in the water, in which it's shooting across the river and capturing any image of fish going past it. This fence prevents them from going around the camera and forces them to go in front of the camera. The field equipment setup consists of a Ditson camera inside the locked box, a camera stand, an off-grid power source, laptop, and external hard drive. The camera operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, beginning at the initial onset of migration season, and is removed during high flow events. This camera pretty much has to be adjusted daily as the flows fluctuate. So it's, in some ways, we do have crew members out there almost every day to check on the camera that it's situated properly to catch the best images. Then we're also continuously downloading the data, so no data is lost. The Ditson camera, like I said, records the entire 24 hours during the day. And in order to expedite the reviewing process, we look at just 20-minute files on the hour, every hour, and then you take those from those 20 minutes, you're able to give an estimate of the entire day for daily passage. This is a photo of what you're basically seeing when reviewing the image. Right here is a fish, and as you can tell, you cannot tell necessarily what type of fish it is, such as a Chinook or a coho salmon. So species apportionment assignment is based on the run timing of the species, because basically in the Eel River, Chinook come up in November and run through the end of December, and then end of December is when steelhead typically start to migrate up the system, and then run through the end of March, beginning of April. So for the main stem Eel River, it's a little bit easier to decide between species because the run timing is different. And there's very few coho salmon. Coho salmon would be coming up in late November and through December and into January, but in the main stem Eel River, there's only a very small population of coho left in Outlet Creek. They're nearly extirpated from the main stem Eel River. So as I mentioned, for this past year in 2018, the first significant rain event in the Eel River watershed did not occur until late November. So this delayed the initial run timing of Chinook salmon. Typically we get a good rain in around Halloween, allowing fish to come into the river, but because the rain didn't really occur to almost Thanksgiving, we didn't see fish numbers until around Thanksgiving, and so large numbers of adult fish were observed shortly after this rain event. And I'll show a figure later of those numbers. The month of December maintained additional pulses of fish, although these numbers were significantly less than what was observed during the November period. And then, subsequent smaller pulses of fish appeared throughout the month, and they were linked to the hydrograph, which meaning like rain events in a bump in flows. It is estimated the vast majority of Chinook salmon run ceased during the last week of December, and this was largely based on two indicators. Only one Chinook salmon ascended the ladder at the Van Arsdale Fish Station in the upper watershed, and then we also conduct South Fork Eel River spawning ground surveys, and we detected almost no new Chinook salmon in the watershed in January. So this is our fish migration estimates. This graph shows basically the yellowish orange line is fish moving in. This right here is 600. So this was that right around Thanksgiving. This huge pulse of fish coming in, 666, and then it dropped significantly. We had another little pulse right at the end of the month, and then it was just kind of like steady, small pulses of fish coming in with certain rain events. Then we get into January, we started seeing steelhead come in, but during these high flows, we're not able to keep the camera in. And so by mid-February, it was about the 5th largest flow in the history of the Eel River, and this maintained high flows in which we weren't able to have the camera in anymore, because basically we have the camera at 9,000 CFS at the Fort Seward gauge, which is about 20 miles upstream. Above 9,000 CFS, we have to pull the camera. So, as I mentioned, our population estimate for Chinook salmon was 3,844 fish from November through the end of December. Then basically we feel confident in that number because we had the camera in place for just a little over 90% of that time. And then we tried to capture the steelhead run. And so we got a first portion of it, which was about 1,400 fish from early January through mid-February before we had to pull the camera. I will say that these numbers are really low. Under 4,000 Chinook salmon I would consider that a poor year for salmon. We're hoping that those numbers will go up in the future, because if numbers are like that, around 4,000 continuing on, that is certainly not a robust number for salmon entering the river. What this shows this is a nice flow to operate the camera. This is taken from the camera looking upstream. This allows easily for the sonar beam to shoot across. This is probably around 4,000 CFS. And what was unusual about this year is this is the median flow. So during most years, you can operate generally the camera during January and even into February and March. It's a little bit on the high end, but this year we had extremely high flows that just didn't allow us to operate the camera from mid-February on. So as I was discussing with the project challenges, generally you're able to operate the camera below 9,000 CFS. This photo on the left here is 18,000 CFS. This was in mid-January, so generally the camera would have been right here as well as the cargo trailer, but so we had to remove both of them. And then just a couple days later, this went up to 45,000 CFS, and then mid-February we had a 200,000 CFS flow, which maintained high flows throughout the rest of the year. Well, like I said, this was brief, but we do provide a report that provides much more detail on it. The report is available in CFW's document library, which is listed there. You can also feel free to contact me, and there is my email. We were very grateful for our project partners, Trout Unlimited, who assisted with the equipment purchasing and setup, and who are going to be helping us with this next year coming up. And certainly our field staff, those listed here, were essential to the project, as well as other people that provided consultation. And initially, Cardinal provided a project lead for us that helped with the project. Is there anything else I should add? No.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Any questions from anyone? This one?
Just
Commissioner Brown?
comments. Great to see that this study was done and the location it was done in. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we hope this provides useful information to the Potter Valley project ongoing licensing and in terms of when Chinook arrive in the Ore River and numbers of fish that are we're looking at associated with the effects of the project. Thank you.
So, Alan, one, or I'm not sure which one of you could answer this, but if I didn't quite catch, was there any differentiation in the counts between the South Fork and the main stem?
I didn't mention that, but California Trout hasn't come out with their final results, but their preliminary results are slightly lower than ours. Right now they're estimating about 3,600 Chinook salmon in the South Fork Eel River.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Any public comment on this item?
Yeah, Madam Chair and Commissioners, George St. Queenie again. I have a couple of questions for you. You said in 2018, if I heard this right, there was 3,084 Chinook in the main stem.
Mm-hmm.
Was the Van Arsdale count the same time, about 232? I remember looking at some.
I think that's correct.
So of the 3,084, only 232 made it to Van Arsdale. How many made it to the base of Lake Pillsbury? Has there been any cameras at the base of Lake Pillsbury for the salmon and the steelhead runs to show us how many fish are there that want to go upstream? These fish are all spawning in the tributaries below. So
There's not a camera at the base of the dam, but the fish wouldn't have much cue to swim to the base of a dam that they can't migrate past.
well, you'd be able to monitor them around Soda Creek, which is about a mile or two below the dam. Somewhere in that area, it'd give us an idea before we spend all these millions of dollars to put fish passage in, which I am for fish passage, but I am not for taking out the dam. But we should, with all these studies that you folks are doing, one would think that you would know how many fish are actually trying to get up above Scott Dam. So my comment.
Thank you.
No comment? Okay.
We'll take your information and be putting all that together and in considerations for how we look at these projects. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. With that, we're coming to a close here. I'd like to invite the commissioners, if anybody has any reports from your various areas.
I do.
Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. Fish and Wildlife has been looking at recreational water bodies and doing testing of the water. And we have one body, it doesn't take large vessels, water vessels, but Mill Creek ponds that tested high in calcium. And so we received a letter from Fish and Wildlife. We're on commissioners' reports?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So this isn't a question for you, just you're still here. So anyway, it's a program you have, and I guess it's state regulation. But we received a letter, and so we're on our way to, we have 90 days to write a plan for quagga and zebra mussel.
Wow.
And I would very much.
How did that happen without any vessels being on there?
Well, it's not infected.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay, it's just it has the high calcium levels
Right.
to create great habitat in case it is introduced. So anyway, but I didn't know about this new regulation, I guess. You have someone dedicated to testing water bodies that are recreational. So we're in the process of doing that. We will be looking maybe at countywide in the future. getting it funded by the Department of Boats and Waterways. But we will collaborate with Sonoma Water because we also looking at plans for Lake Sonoma and Lake Mendocino. So anyway, we'll probably be keeping our eye on Lake County's program so that we don't have different requirements within the region.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Any other commissioners, boards? Appreciate that. And anyway, Alan, thank you. I know we kind of flowed over there, but we are now on to public comments on non-agenda items. Any public comments on non-agenda items?
But other business, can I just mention one thing?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Please go ahead.
I will take the duties of treasurer on seriously. So I'll be ready the next time. So when is that next meeting?
Thank you. We'll make another agenda item then for next time. Great. Thank you, Carrie. Appreciate that. So no public comment on non-agenda items. I think we've probably covered any item of any interest today, and I really appreciate everybody being here. Yes.
You know, I do have one other item, and if you haven't read about it in the media, there were law enforcement, huge bus.
Oh, yeah.
In the location of Dos Rios and Spy Rock. I don't know how far down they went, but they were pretty big, and best term I can use is very bad for the environment.
Yes.
Is from what I understand. So that did occur. I'm happy it occurred because we just don't need these things to continue. Type of activity.
No, thank you. Absolutely. A lot of effort going into that. You'll be hearing very shortly about another group called CROP, which is aimed at cleaning up of public lands. And they'll be going public next week, actually, next Monday. CROP, C-R-O-P, a group that is dedicated to cleaning up public lands from
illegal growth, trespass, gang growth.
Next meeting time and place?
Yep, we're getting to that. We're right there. So thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate this meeting today. I think it was very, very productive. And I'd like to invite you all back to our next meeting, which will be November 22nd in Sonoma County. Our meeting is adjourned.